Hello everyone, welcome to the Can I Just Be podcast. My name is Rocio Flores, and today I want to talk to you guys about my story. So I intended to do this a few weeks ago, but then with the whole COVID-19 stuff that's going on, I've had a lot more people home than usual. There's a lot more noise during the day, and recording a podcast, it's a little bit harder. So I've just kind of been keeping it in my mind. Also, I guess part of me is kind of scared to do this specific piece. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, but I've just been kind of scared. I guess I should just explain what I mean by my story. So I've been doing a lot of like social media things and putting out content and talking in little bits and pieces about things that I've gone through in my experience. I kind of allude to those things as I speak about them, but I've never done anything where I like sit down and I just share everything about myself with the world. I've done that with certain people, but honestly, I don't think I've done that with like the majority of people in my life. You know, the people who are very close to me, I've shared very specific things, and obviously like family, that kind of stuff, right? But even, I would say that even like the people that I'm very close to, they only know like a piece. And so what's actually interesting is like growing up, I just always had this idea like one day I'm going to share my story. Like one day I'm going to talk about everything that I've experienced, and one day I'm going to like write a book. And I would picture myself being this old person, like an old lady on her deathbed who wrote journals of her story with details, and like her kids are going to find it. But that at that point, right, like in my imagination, my parents weren't there anymore. Nobody that I knew was there anymore. Nobody from my actual life was alive to actually ever hear any of it, because my hope was never that the people in my life would ever hear anything. My hope was that I could keep it all secret, keep my life as secret as possible until I had like real relationships that I cared about sharing myself with. And that's not to say that I didn't care about the people in my life. It's just that most of the stories are about people in my life. And so one of my bigger fears with sharing anything in specific has always been that, you know, they're going to see it, or they're going to hear about it, or they're going to find something out that they shouldn't have, or that I'd never wanted them to, or they're going to be seen in a negative light, you know, compared to, I don't know how other people see them, I guess now, but I don't know, that's just a really big fear that I always had, is just, you know, oh my God, people are going to know things about my dad or my mom, or, you know, and that's anxiety producing. And so, as I've thought about, like, at some point, I really got to put it all down in one spot so that I'm able to be able to defer back to this specific story, and that way I don't have to be kind of, you know, repeating myself all the time. A lot of the content that I write, you know, sometimes I'll allude to like, oh, well, I struggle with depression, or I have PTSD, or I have all these issues, right? And people, I think, especially with the scrutiny that there is in the world today, as far as, there's a lot of mental health stigma, and there's also just a lot of like, you know, the whole concept of fake news and all these things. Like people just, they read their own biases into anybody's story. So let's say I write a post and I say, you know, since I've dealt with depression, I've done X, Y, and Z, whatever, right? Automatically a person in their mind is like, she didn't really deal with depression, or she should have done this, or blah, blah, blah. And like they have all these preconceived notions of what my experience is before I've even had a chance to share how that experience came about. And what I've noticed, I guess, throughout the years is when I have actually shared details about my life, people are just sitting there like, oh, wait, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Like, and I guess another fear of mine is also that, like, I guess I didn't have experiences that were that bad, right? Like, I tend to think, like, people who had very, very perfect, awesome, beautiful lives obviously might look at any one detail in my life that was negative and be like, oh my God, I can't believe you went through that, right? But people who had incredibly difficult lives, or even the people that I grew up around, or people who just had very similar experiences, they don't think it's a big deal. I mean, we're just living life, like that's just part of how we live. And so then sharing my story means kind of opening myself up to that critique of what if it's really not that big of a deal, and am I seeking praise for something that everybody goes through? And those kind of thoughts come up in my mind, and that makes me feel like, oh my God, I shouldn't be talking about it. On the other hand, I do feel like there are a lot of people who must have felt as I did as a kid, who didn't feel like they had a voice, who didn't feel like they could share anything, who didn't know that so much of what they were experiencing was not okay. And so while sharing this, I guess my biggest motivator has to be that hopefully somebody who needs it will listen and be like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. And there's a world out there where I don't have to live this way anymore. And that'll give them just a tiny bit of hope to keep going. Because that's what I needed as a kid. And all the books that I read about people who went through horrible things that were way worse than what I've gone through gave me that hope that, like, you know what? They got through this. Like, they went through this and they're at this point. And all the stories of people who, like, struggled and ended up being successful or healthy or in love or, you know, just had wonderful lives, who lived to be that old lady with loving connections with people that they wanted to know, who, like, wrote down their diaries and said, like, I came from this and I, you know, started from the bottom and now I'm here. And that gave me hope. And so that's really more the motivation of why I think it's so important I think it's important for everyone to share their story, whatever it is, whether it seems stupid or not. But I do have a lot of reservations over why I'm wanting to share things, or how I should share things, or whether or not it's even worth it to share things, etc. Anyway, something that I've been wanting to do, just because on my website I have like an About Me section, right? And on there I have kind of like a pretty little bio. I say pretty because I tried to write it really pretty, like Rocio Flores is a blah 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 blah. You know, like something that sounds more on the positive end and idealized end. But there's nothing in there, and I realized this after a long time, that like as much as I want to write like mini, I guess, you know, little nods to my experience, I haven't done anything where I just like bear everything into like one place. So that's what I'm going to do in this podcast today. I actually have notes down. So when I was in therapy, just because I kind of got tired. So what happens is I go to therapy at a college nearby because it's cheap and accessible for someone of my means. And I'm able to access that often in a way that I can't if you set up yourself with a doctor, where like if your insurance changes suddenly you have to go to a different doctor, etc. So the only issue is that there you end up with a new counselor often. And so I got really tired of freaking having to tell my story over and over again, or having to share certain details over and over again. And so I just wrote it down. And I did a very like basic timeline of my life ish. I actually wrote the word ish on it. And so I thought I'm just going to share that timeline here and share small details, because I don't want to go into an incredible amount of detail on specific things. I do want to point out that I'm not going to share every single thing. There are a lot of things that I would not share publicly with anyone. Like in general, I'm not going to, details that are just not, I guess, okay. I think the only time I do share something that is incredibly personal, etc., is when I feel that in the conversation that I'm having, the possible cost of having shared it is that there's going to be a really big gain. As in, like, the person that needs that information really needs to know that somebody else has experienced that. And I don't do that if I don't do that in general. So I'm not sharing everything. That's just, I think that's a given. I mean, most people don't share everything about their life. More or so, I think I just want to share more the general sense of some of the experience that I've had. That way I have a record out there that just says like, hey, if you're someone who says that you really want to know me, you really want to understand me, or you're trying to call me out on what I know or don't know, or what I've experienced, or you want to just get a better sense of why I'm even doing what I'm doing, etc. Hey, here's like a little, you know, here's a video of it, and you can just watch that real quick and then understand just a little bit more. And if you want more detail, you actually care, and you're actually somebody who says they care and who actually wants to get to know somebody better, then you use that information as a starting point to get to know somebody and to maybe allow yourself to feel empathy and compassion for that person. Not where I'm trying to like justify myself, my experiences, my knowledge, etc. Because I think that that's a never-ending cycle. People who are trying to get that are never going to be satisfied, because they're not trying to get satisfied with you. They're trying to just not, they're trying the opposite, I guess. So, okay, I guess I'm getting nervous. I guess one thing to know about me is that I get nervous and I laugh. And I've been called out on that. I never thought it was a bad thing. I guess I didn't even know that that was a thing. I just know I do it. And so if you ever hear me laugh at an inappropriate time, it's not an overt laugh, but it'll look like I'm giggling. I'm not laughing. I'm nervous. So I was born in 1992. I was actually born in Mexico. And by the age of 2, I had come to the US. And I won't share the specific details of that just because legally it's not smart to share anything like that. We're not supposed to. But I grew up here for the most part in the US. I did go back to Mexico when I was 7 and then once again when I was 10. And that was, my mom took us back for several reasons that she had. Some interesting details is I went to 12 different schools with 18 different moves. I lived in over 40 homes by the time that I was 18. I've lived in 7 different cities. The most schools I attended in 1 year were 4. Right now, actually, I was looking back at this timeline and I realized that in the last 5 years, I've had the most stability that I've ever had in my entire life. Like, for every other year of my life, I wrote down so many things, so many experiences. And then the last several years, I'm just like, oh man, I guess I've, lived in the same place, done the same thing, and I haven't really had anything, we haven't had that many major events. So I guess I should just kind of go from the beginning. My parents were poor, like dirt poor, bad poor. Like my mom sent me pictures of where she used to live, and it's like literally there's dirt on the floor. And she had a very, very difficult life. And that's her story to share. I don't want to share too many details about what the things that she experienced were. But I guess to say she was a teenager when she met my dad. Had never had other relationships. And in Mexico, it wasn't, I think it might still be very common for you to just kind of get married, right? Or get with somebody at the age of 15 and go live with them, and suddenly you're a married couple and it's okay to have kids. So my parents were incredibly young. Their decision to come to the US was pure, they had to. I mean, there wasn't many options, and it was what they felt they had to do. My dad was the one that came here. My mom ended up following, which had its own repercussions. And my dad had been working since he was very, very young. So my dad started working when he was like 6 years old. And my mom was not able to continue school after 6th grade. So, I mean, being an adult really the only option you have when you don't have education as an option, right? And knowing that the US is full of opportunity and the American dream and all that stuff, at least in my generation, a lot of people came here for that reason, to try and give their kids a better life. And I truly believe that they did the right thing morally, and in the sense that they did what they felt was right for their future child, etc. And it wasn't easy. My dad dealt with a lot of issues. He was an alcoholic, and he had a lot of anger issues. And now that I'm an older adult, I understand more of the nuances of maybe the reasons behind why he is the way he is, right? Like, back as a kid, we didn't know. As a kid, I just saw my mom being hurt. I saw a lot of violence, a lot of fighting, and I just, thought my dad was bad. And my mom was just basically having to survive that. And so when I was very little, so before the age of 5, I was a brave little kid. I used to tell my mom that she needed to leave my dad, that he had to screw loose, and that we just needed to get away. And I was the one telling her, like, come on, we have to leave. We have to get out of here. And she did try to leave many times. I remember counting as a kid, and it was like 10 times that we left. But it's difficult when you're in a different country and you don't know the language. And my mom was sick. She has rheumatoid arthritis, so she has a disorder that is basically, she's had it since she was a kid, since she was 13. So she has, her knees are wasted away, her elbows are wasted away, her back is bad. Like, she just working a physical job, which is pretty much the only kind of job that there is for an immigrant, was not an option. She didn't have the education level to be able to have other types of jobs, or she didn't have any of the legal resources to be able to access those kinds of jobs, and she didn't have the health resources. So every time we left was a struggle because we couldn't make it. So we always ended up going back. And then, if you know anything about like abusive relationships, you know that there's a lot of back and forth, and it's really easy to judge that, but it's not that easy to actually be in it. When I was a kid, I don't remember being afraid for myself. I remember being afraid for my mom. And so like my dad also, it's hard because like back then I had a lot of hatred in my heart. I was, I just saw good and bad. And my mom was good and my dad was bad. That's how I saw it. And, I didn't really have an understanding of the fact that, my dad was working 60 to 90 hour weeks, every day was Sunday, and he'd come home after a 12-hour day. A lot of the times he'd go out to drink, or he'd come home and drink. And this wasn't because it was like I guess the way we think of like alcoholics when we haven't been around alcoholics is we think of them as like an outlier, or like this person who chose to grab a bottle of alcohol secretly. That's not so much the case when you grew up in a culture or around people who just drink. Like, alcohol is just normal. For a lot of people, alcohol and drinking is very normal. And so it wasn't like a thing that people talked about. It was just that everybody drank and that was normal. But we all knew that my dad's drinking wasn't very normal, because the response of it was that, or how do I say that, the reaction of him ended up almost always being violence. So he'd come home, and I knew as a little 5-year-old that if he came home and he was very jealous, very suspicious, very like worrisome, and I'd stay up and tell my mom, like, pretend you're asleep, like, go to bed. And I'd sit there because my dad would come home and he'd be like, who was here? Who was with your mom? What was going on? Like, why are you? All these questions about, like, I had to kind of sit there and reassure him, like, no, nobody was here. Nothing happened. My mom was at home with us all day. Nobody came. No, there were no men. Like, all I knew as a kid was if I did that, then they wouldn't fight, or he wouldn't hit her. So I was 5-year-old, just staying up late, reassuring my dad. And like, as a kid, I guess that felt like I was doing something. I felt like I was like taking on control of something. Now I look back and I'm like, especially after being diagnosed with OCD, I'm just like, oh my God, is my dad OCD? Like, did he just need that reassurance? Because that's the kind of reassurance I seek. And it's not funny, but I do want to point out that the relationship I have with my dad now is very different than the relationship I had then. Obviously, he is somebody who has reformed in many of his ways and has done a lot of work to get to a better and healthier state of life. Not that he never struggles, but that's his own story to tell. I do want to point out that back then I didn't have the knowledge to understand why he was the way he was, because I didn't have the knowledge of why I was the way I was. And I mean, if you grew up in the way that he grew up, with the traumas he experienced, with the life he experienced, it made a lot of sense that without any intervention, without any support, without any connections, without any education about mental health, about any issues like that, you would choose alcohol, you would choose violence, you would choose to deal with things the way you had only ever experienced, because that's the way you do things when that's what you know. And so I understand that now. And that's helped me a lot with recovering my relationship with him now as an adult. But back then, obviously, I didn't know that. I didn't have any sense of that. He didn't have any sense of that. And so I do want to point that out. I'm not wanting to just like talk shit about him. It's just, it's part of the story that I did feel very negatively towards him back then. My parents got divorced when I was 7. Before that, we had already experienced a lot of violence. Like, we had seen a lot of violence. I had seen my parents fighting and my dad using a knife to threaten my mom. I'd seen him throw pots and pans. I had seen her bruised up many times. So I knew that violence was very real, and I knew that the possibility of violence was very real. And so I just knew I had to be very careful. One time, I think I was like 3 or 4, and I was playing outside and I played with the bottle and I like broke it and I cut my hand. And I still have that scar today, but we had to hide it. Like, that's something that obviously my dad doesn't know that. Don't tell him. But my mom was just so terrified. She was so scared that my dad was going to react badly. Like, I mean, you would be too if you knew that he reacted badly over overcooked food, or And so I was this little kid having to like pretend that I wasn't hurt. And for a long time, like, that memory just stuck in my head that like I was scared. And I had very good reason to be scared. Like, we knew we had very good reason to be scared. So I never saw it as irrational. Like, I thought that was a very good decision. Like, we have to be very careful. So while I had a lot of like that feeling of braveness and control, like, I got this, I can protect my mom, I can help her, I also knew very much like we have to be very careful, you know. And pretty much before they split up, a whole lot of the control that we had and a lot of the being careful was, for me at least in my mind, was to take care of my mom and to take care of my little brother, who is like 3 years younger than me. And I never felt it like aimed at me, because it wasn't aimed at me. Like, I didn't feel like he was gonna turn on me the way that he turned on her. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically, like, I saw him hit her. I saw him come home drunk and have these giant fights, and, you know, the cops being called and stuff like that. But for the most part, if I got yelled at, it was because I did something, or I guess presumably he felt I did something, like I broke something or I messed up and I did this or I did that. So a lot of it was about keeping the peace, and I knew that I could try to do that. And then when he left, then we could be ourselves, right? And so we were very, very quiet kids. We would just sit there very nicely. I remember one time I heard my uncle say, like, "Oh, you're so lucky, your kids are so good." And I remember thinking as a kid, like, yeah, we're really good kids, but it's not because I want to be a good kid. Like, I knew that if I just sat there and I didn't do anything and we didn't speak out of turn, that we would be fine. But, I mean, I guess I never understood why, like, because I would see how my other cousins would act, and to me, obviously, because I was being told that those things were bad, they would, like, you know, run around and they would play and they would talk back, and knowing now, like, that's just being a kid, they were bad kids. You know, that's what we were taught. They were the bad kids and we had to be good kids. And I wanted to be, I always wished I could be, because I was like, man, they do all these things and they don't get yelled at. Like, they're not afraid. How are they not afraid, you know? And it wasn't really until after they split up that it kind of got turned around, where it was a little bit more directed at me specifically. Not that my brother never got in trouble, it's just that a lot of the conversation was like everything that was going wrong. So, like, if my brother got in trouble, it was my fault, because I should have somehow known to not allow him to do this or that. And pretty much I became like the woman of the house once we were actually living with my dad. So at first, when we first left for good, like the time that we left for good, it was a really big deal. Cops were called. We had to leave the home, walked down the street to a friend's house, and then they let us call. My mom figured out a number for people who help people who have been battered, and we went to a battered women's shelter and lived there for an entire summer, which, by the way, is one of the best memories of my life. Like, not that night, but that summer. Like, that place was beautiful. It was awesome. There were other kids. There were games. They had a tree house. We were very happy, and during that time, you know, they helped my mom basically get up on her feet. So they helped with making sure that my dad went through the legal process. So he went through like domestic violence stuff, and my mom was able to get our old apartment and get a job, and they basically helped set us up. And that was awesome. I actually really like that, and I have a lot of appreciation for people who do that kind of work. It was amazing for us to have that option. And so if you've gone through any kind of abuse, if you've had any of those difficulties, there are resources out there set up to help you. Please seek support. Please make a safety plan. Call somebody. There's a lot of resources, and I'll link all of them in the bottom of this podcast and in any of the commentary on here, because I think people need to understand that there are resources and that there is a way out. Because my mom got out. I think I said that I was 7. I think I was 10. My bad. But anyways, my mom finally left, and during this time, maybe about like a year later, my mom started dating my stepdad. And I call him my stepdad because he was in our lives for about 7 years or so, like almost 10 years actually. And that was another interesting situation. It ended up being that he was also abusive. Not like my dad. It was never as bad as my dad. That's not to say that one can be worse than the other. I think if anybody's in any kind of situation that's abusive, it's not okay. But it was, a lot of it, I guess, was centered more around us. So when we were with my mom, there was a lot more fighting, a lot more yelling, a lot more escalation of issues. And so it was easier to not be there. You know, I think of like my dad, and a lot of what happened with my dad was very complex and subtle, and that subtle fear that kind of permeates your life to the point where you're like so afraid to do anything. But it wasn't that physical, at least with me. And then with my stepdad, we were pretty much cool. Like everything was cool until it wasn't, right? So we could talk and we could joke and we could watch TV and watch movies, and there was like funness, right? Like he was very fun with my brother. He liked him a lot, and they talked about cars, and you know, there was a lot of fun until it wasn't. And he was more physical, at least with me. Like one time he got pissed off, so he just like kicked me, like not even like, oh, a slight tap, like he just lifted up his leg all the way, and I was like this 10-year-old kid, or I think I was like, yeah, like 10 or 11, and just kicked me down. And like I still remember though that like I wasn't afraid of him, even though in a much greater sense he you could say that he was more dangerous. I wasn't scared of him. I was like, you're not my dad. Like he has no right over my life. And the way I saw it, it's just, you know, as long as it felt manageable, because it wasn't like a constant threat. It was just like heated. Like, people got heated. He was fighting with my mom, and then I happened to get in the way, you know. And versus with my dad, where it was very like, we just were so scared. Like I was really scared. The first time we had gone to Mexico was because my grandma was sick, and so back in the day, moving across countries was pretty simple. And I won't go into the legalities of it, but the idea that you could just go and see somebody pass away and be with them at the end of their days was a reality, and we went and did that. My grandma ended up not passing away then, and we just came back, and it was like a month. Later on, when my mom was with Tony, she tried to, it was like a decision, she was going to leave him, and we were going to go to Mexico, and we were just going to make a new life there. Because my mom at this point it's been about a good more than 10 years since, or at least 10 years since she had left. Maybe I'll talk about immigration on a different podcast at some other point, but a very fascinating aspect of it is that the people who stayed are living so much better than the people who came here. And that's not to say that the American dream isn't possible, or that the opportunities that I gained because of my parents' decisions aren't amazing and have put me in a place where I live much better than people who stayed. But the people who initially come, like if you're a first generation immigrant, the opportunities that you have here are not very good. And my aunts and uncles that did stay over there, they have houses, they have cars, they have a life. And so my mom knew that now at this point, and she missed her family, and I genuinely believe that that's what her intention was, to take us over there, build a house, get us a future that's different. Unfortunately, when we were there, she ended up deciding like, well, the best way to do this is for me to work and get U.S. money, you know, like, because over there it's very difficult to build up a savings. So she thought she'd leave us over there with family. She'd come back, work, and send money for us to then build a house to eventually her come back. And that's what I genuinely believed. But she left me with one family, and she left my brother with another family in a different city. And so it was really hard. I think of that time, and it was probably, like, I think of myself as being kind of a whiny kid and being ungrateful, but it was really hard. I had never been away from family. We literally had never been separated from my brother, and I had no support. I had always gone to English school, so school was hard. Like, the language part was hard. Not that I didn't know Spanish, but I didn't know official Spanish, and my cousins weren't very nice, and it was very difficult because, like, I was sort of like an extra person in their house. At that time, I was also going through, I was having ulcers, so I wasn't even allowed to eat the food, you know, and I didn't even have a uniform. My mom sent money. I never got my uniform for school, so I was like this kid that was wearing something else, and I remember crying at night, you know, just being like a little kid, because I was a little kid, like, I mean, I feel guilty at it, and I felt so guilty about it back then, but now I think back and I'm like, I was freaking 10. Are you kidding me? Like, I didn't have my parents. So, because I would go between my aunts, and then I would go and spend the weekends with my grandma. My dad's mom, she knew how I was struggling and what I was going through, and she decided, no, she's going to take me back, and my dad paid to get me back. And again, I won't go into the legalities of how that went about, but she brought us back to the U.S. From there on, we pretty much lived with my dad. That was their decision. My mom was not in a stable place. She ended up going back with my stepdad. And my dad wasn't in a very stable place either, but he was able to work, and he was able to, take care of us financially. And this is kind of when, like, I guess it got hard. We did a lot of back and forth for the first few years. Like, sometimes we would live with mom, sometimes we would live with my dad, and it was more like months at a time. It wasn't like we got to do several years or so, or it wasn't like regular visitation. It was like whoever could take us and whoever could take care of us in the moment was who took us. And I'm very grateful for having that, of course, because obviously, you want to be fed and clothed and go to school and that kind of stuff. But it also put us in, like, maybe not so great situation. For example, one of the places we lived at was, it was with family, but, they had their own place, and if we wanted to stay with them, we stayed in the cellar. So it was, like, outside of the house, and it was, I guess this is a little more embarrassing to share, but it was a basement room with nothing. It wasn't, like, finished or anything. It was, like, it wasn't even, like, a finished basement. It wasn't even, like, a regular basement, and, we didn't have a bathroom. If you had to use the bathroom, you had to go squat in the corner. It was not, it's not something that I talked about for a long time because that's just embarrassing. Another time when we were living with my mom was also in another basement, not a finished one, but more like a real basement. But we weren't allowed to go upstairs to use the bathroom for the people upstairs, so we had buckets in our room, and that's where we had to use the bathroom. And another time, I think we lived in we lived in a studio, which was fine. That was always fine. We lived in studios a lot, but we got bed bugs. So I remember having to, like, one night it was just so bad. It was not getting better. That we just, like, my dad couldn't sleep, we couldn't sleep, none of us couldn't sleep, and we just slept in the bathroom, like, on the tub, because it was just easier. And then, we had babysitters in the beginning when we were, like, really young, around the age of, I think it was, like, 12, 13-ish. My dad started leaving us by ourselves because I think we had, like, a babysitter, and I think one of the kids got pregnant, something like that. I don't even know if it's true, or he just heard that, and he got scared of leaving us with people that might be doing things to kids. And so it just now became like we just had to be home by ourselves, and it was fine because we felt capable of doing it. I felt capable of doing it. I guess I didn't realize at the time of agreeing, like, yeah, we're fine, that would mean that I would have to take on a lot of the responsibilities as, like, the women of the house, At that point, it was my job to take care of my brother and make sure that he was fed, make sure that he took a shower, make sure that the house was cleaned. And obviously, as I got older, those responsibilities were bigger and bigger. Not like, oh, it's your job to take out the trash. It was like, you need to prepare dinner. Like, you need to make sure everything's cleaned. Like, that's my job. And this coincided with my tween and preteen years, and that's kind of when things started getting really hard with my dad. So I was obviously, like, a blossoming girl, right? And I liked boys, and I was never going to share that with my dad, of course. But it became obviously more apparent, so my dad started getting more suspicious, more worrisome, and it started becoming more of an issue that, like, are you talking to anybody? What are you doing? Why are you doing that? And so then, like, I was terrified of, like, I used to, like, hide the fact that we had parent-teacher conferences, because my biggest fear wasn't my grades, because I had good grades. Like, there was no other option. You had to have good grades. But what if we went to school and a guy came up to me and said, hi, like, what will my dad do? Remember one time, this kid from school had our phone number, and he called me, and he was calling so that I could give him my friend's number, right? Like, it was totally like a friend call, like that kind of thing. But my dad cussed him out, and I found out about it at school the next day, which was more like embarrassing, I guess those things are not that big of a deal. A lot of parents are very protective, and that's how I saw it. Like, my dad's just really protective. very protective, very strict. That's how I saw it, because nobody ever said like this isn't normal, and a lot of that isn't, like, I guess, abnormal. I guess what I kind of didn't recognize was that, like, while there's a certain level of protection and guidance and rules that a parent should set, and it's, you know, what a person sets, and that's their decision to parent their children in whatever way they want. If they want them to date, if they want them to be able to go out, if they want them, whatever. I get that. The fact that my dad kept us very, very isolated, and that he kept us very, we weren't allowed to go out, we weren't allowed to do anything, we couldn't open the door, was for our safety. In his eyes, he did everything he needed to do to keep us safe. That's normal, or at least common. What wasn't common, and I didn't recognize what hit me so hard, was getting called a mule. Being called names. You know, being threatened, being called names, being compared to people, being yelled at constantly for, like, the simplest of things, being expected to have responsibility above what a 13-year-old person with 13-year-old brain is able to comprehend, being yelled at for imperfection that, like, was slightly under, like, if I got an A minus, or like if I even mentioned the fact I got a B, it's like, why the fuck do you go to school then? Like, that kind of stuff was not normal. Anyways, during this time, I just kind of saw it as my dad's really strict, and you know, he's just being how he is, and it's because he drinks, it's because he does this. And I knew that there were other issues with him, like drug kind of related things that I won't go into, because that's not my story to tell. But during this time, my mom also kind of disappeared. It wasn't intentional. I at least as a kid, I genuinely believed that. I knew that she just had a really difficult situation with my stepdad. She wasn't physically capable of being financially responsible for us, and putting us in those situations where we went over meant the higher risk of more violence, or more aggression, more stress, obviously. So, you know, my dad had us. We were fine, we were eating, we were going to school, we were doing everything we had to do. So, you know, we talk on the phone sometimes, and seeing her became a little more erratic. Like, at first it was like sometimes we go on the weekends, right? Like that kind of custody, but then sometimes it'd be months, we just didn't see her. She actually went to Mexico then, and came back. And she actually lives in Mexico now. She moved when I was about 20, and I have an 8-year-old sister that lives out there with her. Now, hanging out with my mom was cool because she was like the cool parent. She was much more free. We got pizza with her, stuff like that, right? Like, we were pretty poor overall, like with my dad. Once we were older, it wasn't as poor as we living in a cellar poor, and nowhere near what they experienced. But it wasn't like, we weren't people who went out to eat. We weren't people who got, you know, that kind of stuff. That wasn't normal. At least not while we were younger. And so going to my mom's and having pizza was freaking cool. Or like, I'd go grocery shopping with her, and she would get chips, and like, it was awesome. Like, I loved it. And it was like a weekend of like fun, which kind of also led to a lot of bad decisions on my end. Because like, it was a lot easier to get away, you know, and get away with things, because my mom was a lot more free. Like, I could just, for a while there, like, we went and we actually lived with some other family for a while, with my dad and other family. And then later on, when we moved on our own, we all lived in the same block. So my mom and my dad both had an apartment in the same street. So I could go home and be like, I'm gonna go to my mom's. And during that was like in middle school, late middle school, I got to just be like, okay, I'm gonna go to my mom's and be with her all day. And then, because my dad was working, and we'd hang out with my mom, but I could leave. I was allowed to go out, and I would go hang out with my friends, and I did whatever the heck I wanted, and it's kind of really stupid, and did a lot of stupid shit, like things that a middle schooler shouldn't be doing, or even a high schooler, right? But and I won't go into details of that, just because I don't want to get in trouble. I think at this point, I still just thought of myself as like, you know, I just have a strict parent. Like, I just have strict parents. At this point, a lot of the people that I was around were people who also had parents who drank. I had parents who were strict. And it was very normal, very common, that if we wanted any kind of experience that was other than being at home in front of the TV, we had to sneak out, that kind of stuff. It wasn't like it wasn't abnormal. And I think when people talk about trauma, I remember being in a sociology class where we talked about trauma, and how the consensus of trauma is that, like, person gets traumatized when an experience that they have is uncommon to them, right? So there's a lot of cultures where people do things that in our life we're like, oh my god, that must be torture. Like, how could people do that? But when it's a common connected experience, something that everybody does, it's just normal. It doesn't feel like trauma to be physically hurt. It doesn't feel like trauma for certain things, right? So like, I just thought everything was normal. And I mean, I knew I wasn't allowed to talk about what I was experiencing because I didn't want to get in trouble. Like, we were told a lot, like, don't, like, be really careful, you don't say that in front of school. Like, one time, I remember this, like, kindergarten, before I even knew English, and I drew a picture of my dad getting a beer from the fridge, and I came home and told a funny story about how I had to tell the story, but I didn't know how to say the words, so I had to have a friend explain and translate it for me. And I got in trouble because they were like, don't you, like, you don't want us to get, you guys get taken away from us, don't you understand? Like, you know, like, there was a lot of expectation for me to know that you do not say anything about what's happening to anybody, because if you do, you're going to get taken away, and you're going to get separated from your brother. And we knew that that was the risk. Like, we knew that we should not say anything about what we're experiencing to anybody. Things like hearing that people at school went to the movies, so that they went out with friends, so that they went to parties, or stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't even on my radar, things to try and do, because I knew I couldn't. And I guess looking back now, I think a lot of it was like I was just used to it, so I didn't really have much of an expectation of wanting those things. Looking back, I still genuinely believe they're not that big of a deal. Like, going to the movies is not a big deal. Having birthday parties is not a big deal. Going shopping is not a big deal. Like, things that I heard a lot of other people experience were not a big deal, because it was just not part of our experience. I grew up believing, like, yeah, we're poor, in the sense that, like, we don't have a lot of extra money, but we are so rich compared to people in Mexico. Like, we are so well off. Like, I shouldn't be complaining for not having things that other people have, because we have so much more. And I kind of got trained to see that other people were just very much, they just had a lot. You know, a lot of people had extra. And I didn't need those things. Like, we didn't need any of that. And so, you know, like, especially how I live now, I'm just like, oh man, like, yeah, I had no expectation of wanting those things, and none of those things ever made me feel less than. So I never felt, I never felt like I was bad off. I just felt like other people were very, very much privileged, and I was also very blessed. At the end of 8th grade, we moved to a new city, so where I live now. It was kind of a big deal because, one, we had moved a lot, but I mean, you know, you're in middle school, you don't want to move, so you got your friends, and it was very sudden, like, hey, we're moving. And then it's like, oh, now we're moving. And it was for economic reasons, you know, it was around the 2006 era when, like, jobs were really, like, good, right before everything kind of went to hell. And so my dad was able to get a loan, we got a trailer, we moved to Greeley, my uncle had a really nice trailer, we were moving with my cousin who I loved and had lived with before, and that part of the experience was really good. I had gotten into some trouble in school at that point, and so the option of staying home with my mom, so like moving with my mom and not moving to Greeley with my dad, had kind of been lost because I had gotten in trouble. Around that time also when I started to feel different. I remember that summer before 8th grade, my friend went to Mexico or something like that, and I was kind of alone. And so then suddenly it was like a lot of me just feeling different. Like, I just started to, like, I don't know how to explain other than, like, I just suddenly didn't want to live. Like, I just didn't feel good. It was like I think up to then I had this sense of, like, braveness or confidence in myself, like, oh, you know, things just are the way they are, but, like, this will happen or this will happen. And suddenly when I felt really disconnected from people, I realized, like, I can't talk to my parents about anything. Like, couldn't share how I felt. I couldn't share anything I was experiencing in school. I couldn't share anything with my cousins or my brother, because if I shared anything with them, like, they might tell my dad. And that reality of how afraid I was and how I could not share anything. When I mean share anything, it's like I pretended like everything was fine no matter what was happening. Like, came home and smiled, you know, and I did what I had to do every night. And I tried to share this with somebody once, family members now, and I tried to share, like, you know, we didn't talk when we were kids. Like, we didn't share things with our parents, or like, we didn't talk to our parents. And even to this day, like, I don't talk to my parents the way other people talk to their parents. And I remember the person's response was like, oh no, I mean, when our kids were young, I mean, they didn't talk to us in the same way they talk to us now. I mean, and then they started going off on like how, they wouldn't joke certain ways. And like, I remember feeling so like, I don't think you understand the extent of which we didn't talk to our parents. Like, I'm telling you that when I was 4 years old, I cut my hand pretty severely. And I hid it. Like, I literally hid it. As a little kid, I held my arm together and out of sight for the weeks it took to heal, because that's how scared we were. When I was 7 in Mexico, I had an experience with a family member that was not okay, not appropriate, and I won't go into any kind of detail. But I didn't say anything about it, and I wasn't going to. Like, my fear was, if my dad knows anything, he's going to kill someone. If my mom knows somebody, if my mom knows something, she's going to kill herself. And I always hid it. Any experiences I had in middle school and later on in high school with boys and in inappropriate sense that were not okay and shouldn't have happened were also things I just had to, I wasn't going to share it with anybody. And even to this day, I'm like so scared to talk about it right now, because what if my mom listens? What if my dad listens? What if they ask me about it? I'm going to have to make a decision, to either say something or hide it. I also did have a lot of fun separately from my family. Like, I just, I found my ways of like connecting with friends and my cousins and stuff like that in ways that we kind of, teenage stuff. Like, we just snuck out did stupid shit. And, missing school and that kind of stuff. And I did get into legal trouble a few times. And while I definitely learned my lesson, and I would never recommend that anybody does anything bad, I still stick with the concept that, like, I made the decision. Like, I made the decision that I wanted to try and explore the world, like, live life. Like, I used to think, like, I just want to experience everything, and I just want to do everything that I can, because I don't want to be like my parents, where, like, they are so sheltered. Because on my parents' end, they were all like, you can't do anything right now. Don't get pregnant. Don't get, you can't risk getting pregnant. That was their biggest thing, right? Like, and you can't do this because you're going to get in trouble because you're an immigrant, and you can't do this because of this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this. And I was very, very, very much overprotected, to the point where I kind of tried to rebel on the opposite end and just tried to do as many things as I could get away with when nobody was around, right? And so I won't go into any details because I don't want to get in trouble. But I did have my fun, I guess, in the sense that I as a teenager got to experience a lot of things that I hope one day I'm going to sit around with my kids, and when they're having any kind of issue, I'm going to be able to be like, you know what? I experienced that. Like, I get how you're feeling. Like, I had those options in front of me, and I made this decision, and let's figure out how you can make your decision, because I didn't have that. Like, there's no way I could have said anything, to anybody. I didn't have anybody to talk about anything. So yeah, I did a lot of stupid things because I also didn't have anybody to help me kind of make decisions, and I also put myself in a lot of places where I could have went way worse. Like, I could have done way worse things. I could have been way worse off. And I'm very blessed. And I look back now and, like, my mother-in-law told me, she's like, God was protecting you, because, yeah, I could have messed up. Like, I could have been, I did a lot of dumb things that I don't feel comfortable sharing. But I can say that I lived at least through those years because I felt confident as a teenager that I knew better, because obviously when you're a teenager, you think you're so smart. And so I think in a way, I genuinely believe that the situation I was in was never going to change. So let me be very clear that, like, no matter what I did, my number one thought at any given point of any given day was, my dad can't know. My dad can't find out. I have to be back home. I have to make sure that he doesn't, like, I have to answer the phone. My number one preoccupation at all times was to be safe from my dad. There's a few experiences during the high school time that, like, for example, when I got in legal trouble, that was a pretty big deal, because my dad found out about it, that he had to come get me. So, also, like, I had an aunt that passed away. That was, I guess, difficult to see my family process, and it kind of changed that dynamic of my family in the sense that we used to be a very close family, and then after that it kind of separated everyone, which just made it hard to again, I didn't have a lot of, we didn't have a support system. And then same goes with like, I had a cousin who ran away and she just kind of disappeared for several months. So the one that was most close to, she was gone. And so again, I didn't have a support system. Like my mom's only brother living in the US was just as violent. And so even though he was my cool uncle, one time when we went over, like he got very aggressive with us, and then we knew about how aggressive and violent he was towards his spouse. So in my head, hey, he's the cool uncle, but you still can't trust him. Or, hey, my cousin's really cool, she knows about me, she ain't gonna tell me. But what if she says the wrong thing? You know, like one time she actually stayed with us, and I thought we were having a really cool night, and we were all joking, and I don't know, I think my dad got upset because we were laughing at something, and he just threw the phone at my face, like busted my lip open. And I remember the face that she made, like the disbelief in her face, like, oh my god, that just happened. Like, shit. I recognize him. Like, it's like, I think in that moment, at least it looked to me like she finally believed me. Like, because obviously everyone in the family knew I was scared of my dad. Like, everybody knew that we were scared of our dad. But nobody knew why. Or, I guess people had seen my mom bruised up when she was younger. They knew my mom left him because of violence. They knew he was jealous. They knew he drank more than the rest of them. And in a sense, I can't understand how they what's that term, like suspend disbelief, like, or I don't understand how they didn't do something about it. As an adult now who has nieces, who my own sister-in-law has been going through a divorce, and I know about their experience and the feeling that I get thinking that they may be unsafe. I have never understood why we didn't have support, why we didn't have family who took us out of that situation. I remember one time that like we were at a family party, because they used to have those a lot, and you know, everybody's drinking and that's just normal, whatever. But the teenagers, or us like tweens, right, we're all hanging out by the cars, and my cousins got in the car to listen to music, because you know, back in the day we used to listen to like hip hop and rap, you know, because everyone else was listening to the old Mexican music. And I guess some teenage boys around the block came up to the car, and my cousins were talking to them, and I knew not to talk to them. Like, look ahead, don't be part of it, because you don't want to get in trouble. Except I did get in trouble, and I remember getting pulled out of the car and like being yelled at in front of everybody, and being told to stand by a tree in the middle of like an entire family party with like, I'm talking like there's like at least 50 people there. And I remember them like whispering about me, being like, oh my god, what did she do? Oh, poor Betty. They call me Betty. But like basically saying like, poor girl, what did she do? Why did he yell at her? Like, but not doing anything about it, you know. And another time that like when we were kids, and this is when we were little, we went to a family party, and all the kids were in a room, because that's how we used to do it. Like, all the kids were in one room, all the adults were in a different room, and everyone was messing around, but I was being very careful. Just sit on the bed, don't do anything dumb, but laughing, you know, trying to socialize, trying to be a normal kid. And a door fell and fell on my brother, which had to randomly had to be the thing that happened, and my dad flipped out on the family. You know, I remember he flipped out on me for not somehow being able to protect my little brother from being hit by a door that fell suddenly. And it was common knowledge, and to this day it's common knowledge that, like, you know, there's drinking, there's issues. Like, there was a family party when we were kids, this was when we were little, and it was a big fight. Cops came, there was blood on people, and I remember my cousin like shoved us into a room, because she was the older one, and we were all in a little room, like 10 kids, you know, not knowing what was going on, only for us to like walk out to have to say goodbye to our dads, who were being carried off by the cops because they had gotten into a fight with bottles and they were bleeding all over. And that's my image of my dad being taken away by a cop with blood all over his head, you know. And people knew. Guess who started the fight? Like, people knew the experience of being around my dad. And yet, knowing all this, I know that at least there was some sense of disbelief, or some sense of like, that's not our issue, or maybe it was loyalty, maybe it's just tradition, maybe it's the fact that, you know, a lot of places still genuinely believe that women should keep their place, and it's okay for a man to hit his wife. Things like that, those old ideas, are still incredibly prevalent, not just in Mexican society and culture and Latino culture, but even in the US. Like, even on Facebook, you should see the shit people post. Like, a lot of people still are very much okay with that. And if you haven't experienced that, I think that's amazing. I really do not want you to ever have to experience that. And I hope you're never around anybody who believes that way. But I don't think anybody thinks that they're bad for believing those things. I think that they just see it as what is right. And violence in a lot of situations and in a lot of groups of people and in a lot of cultural, traditional, just individual groups is seen as the logical next step from disobedience. And anything that doesn't feel good is disobedience. So anything that a person responds to you in any way that you believe is not okay is disobedience, which is a perfectly good excuse for violence. And it doesn't make it okay. But again, I grew up with, I guess I went to American schools, right? So I was being taught all about freedom and opportunity, and you're a woman, you could be a president, like all this stuff. And in my head, it was just kind of like two worlds. So this is what the older people think. This is what new people think. And one day, I'm going to be out of this. And one day, I'll be able to choose those things. I just have to make it out. Basically, that was my idea. Like, I'll just have to make it out of that, and one day, things will be different, and I'll be able to choose how things are. I guess what I think people don't recognize is that if you don't give people support during that, and they don't know that they have to actually process things during that, they don't know that it's going to be really hard to actually do that. So, I guess let me point out a few other little things that kind of stuck in my head throughout the years, because then eventually, I do end up being an adult who gets out. The whole lack of support thing, it's also extended to like my school life, because we moved so often that it's not like I ever got to build strong enough relationships where somebody was able to see those patterns often. But I was also kind of like a weird little kid. Not weird in a noticeable way, in the sense that I wasn't the class clown. I wasn't a kid who started trouble. I was like the complete opposite of that. So, for example, in 5th grade, I had a winter coat, and I was so freaking terrified of getting up and hanging it, because all the other kids were there hanging their coats, that I would just wear my coat all day long, every single day, even on the hot days. Like, I would sit there sweating and just pretend that everything was fine. And I remember hearing people talk about it, like the teachers and the students kind of being like, what the hell? And nope, I could not get myself to do it. I didn't talk a lot in class. It was really hard for teachers to get me to talk. I was very quiet, very shy. I got so incredibly nervous just for any kind of talking, But then when it came to like the socializing aspect outside of like a classroom, I was trying to be cool, and I had I had friends. I for the most part felt like I was pretty normal. Except for like, I also like realized a lot of things. Like, I noticed my accent was different, so I would try to change my accent. I noticed that I didn't understand the words, so I would try to like figure out what they meant or how to use them, because I didn't understand what people were talking about. And it, throughout the years, that stayed the same all throughout high school, where like in class, I was so freaking shy, like very shy. And I put a lot of work into doing my work well, like, because I knew I could not come home with bad grades. But on the other end, outside of class, I tried to be cool, which got me in trouble, because then I would try to be cool, I would do dumb stuff because I was trying to get along with the people around me. I was trying to fit in, and I was trying really hard to fit in, which again got me into other troubles, just teenage stuff. But that lack of support, where like you don't have anybody to notice those patterns and to kind of be there for you and understand, like, hey, why are you doing that? Or not to question you, but to just try to actually understand you and get you support that you need. I didn't have that. So I guess I just felt really confused so much of the time. Like, I just always felt like, what's the right thing to do? Am I supposed to do this? How do I do that? Why do people do this? Like, I used to read books to try and understand, like, how people think or how people act. And so a lot of my understanding of people comes from books. Like, I would read a magazine that said, if a boy likes you, he will do X, Y, and Z. And that's all I knew. So I was like, okay, I have to do X, Y, and Z. Like, that's how I get people to look at me. That's how I get people to do that. But unlike in class, it was more about, like, just do what you gotta do. Get out. Do, just don't be noticed. Like, don't let anybody see you. And so I was kind of a weird kid in the sense, like, I remember, like, I didn't like my hair, so I would put my hair in this weird low bun tail, like, every single day. Like, other kids talked about their hair and doing their, stuff like that, and I could not make myself do certain things. Like, I had, like, these rituals that I had to do, and that's the thing, my dad had rituals too. Weird ass things. Way weirder than me. And I don't want to share any of them because they're his thing, but I didn't know they were weird because I just knew that that's just how things were done. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't do this, okay, I won't do that. Like, don't put this here, okay, I won't put that there. I knew if I did the thing that I wasn't supposed to do, I would get in trouble. So I kind of just did the rituals the way they were supposed to be done. And then I had my own little way, like, I had to do this, and I did this thing with my fingers, and I used to, like, tap my fingers in a certain way, and I had to do things a certain way. Had no concept of OCD, obviously, because you don't learn that, and mental health stuff is not really well appreciated in Hispanic communities. So I was just weird. And, like, I used to collect wrappers. And I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about, like, I had boxes full of wrappers because I couldn't throw them away. I don't know how to explain that other than I just could not do that. So, yeah, I was kind of a weird kid. But again, I don't think anybody noticed it because I was a good kid. Like, I had good grades. I did what I had to do in class. I was just a really shy kid, right? So people just like, oh, that's just a shy kid. They're just shy. They don't talk because they're shy. Nobody questioned the fact that I would sit there and, like, not pay attention in class because I was daydreaming. Like, nobody knew I was doing that. There were a few times where people noticed. Like, I remember one time I was sitting at a table and suddenly everybody was yelling at me. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I didn't say that. But I didn't know what was happening. And it was because I had been spaced out. And they had been trying to get my attention, and I didn't know that. And I remember that time being like, you have to be more careful. Like, you have to be really careful. Like, you can't space out. And I couldn't space out at home. I remember getting in so much trouble for spacing out. And, again, I think my dad saw it as a choice. Like, I was trying to ignore him or something. I don't know. But, I would space out. I was always being told that I was in the clouds. That que siempre me la pasaba en las nubes. Right? And, it wasn't a good thing. Because it was like, I was choosing it, but I knew I couldn't choose it. It was just, like, I didn't know about dissociation or whatever. Right? I just knew that sometimes time passed. Which wasn't an issue other than getting in trouble from it until I started driving. Because it's kind of scary when you're like, how did I get here? Like, suddenly you're, like, somewhere else and you're like, I don't remember doing this. And that's terrifying. Anyways, I mean, what I'm trying to make a connection to is I think there was a lot of patterns that went unnoticed because nobody was paying attention. Wanting to die and starting to do things relating to that and making a plan to die. And I would take pills and try to take them, and I would steal them and try to take them. And I mean, I think a teacher should have noticed. I remember I fell asleep in class once because I took, like, several Benadryl and I just passed out. And she just, I think for the most part, especially once you get to high school, it's easier for people to not pay attention because they just think you're a teenager who's doing dumb shit, like, they're not trying to be like, why is that student acting so erratic, And for the most part, if you're a good kid getting good grades, nobody cares. Nobody's going to notice that you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I guess another experience that kind of got me where, for example, one time my dad cut himself. It was a very dramatic night. There had been a fight, yelling, that kind of stuff. And then next thing you know, he's yelling and we had to go check on him, and he had cut himself and had to clean up the blood. And I remember that being very shocking, and then at the same time I felt so bad because I didn't feel bad in the sense that the moment I was like, he's fine, I was just annoyed, which made me feel guilty, But I think a bigger annoyance to me was the fact that, like, I think in my head I wanted to do that. Like, I just wanted to get out, and it wasn't fair to me that he got to choose that. Do you know what I mean? So again, I had a lot of hatred. I don't even know how to explain just how bad that hatred was. Like, I was so angry. I just wanted to get out. I saw my dad as like this bad person. That's all I could see. That's not all I see now. I want to make that very clear. I now see my dad for the struggles that he went through, from, I mean, literally real struggles that I never had to go through as a kid. And his experiences in a country without any support either, and him battling addiction and mental health and other issues. And somehow we had food on our plate every day for the most part throughout our childhood. There were very few times that we actually worried about that. Maybe we weren't having fancy food. I mean, me and my brother used to grab saltine crackers and put butter on them and like a slice of tomato, and that was our snack, and we were happy. And that's the thing, like, I never was made to feel poor. I was never made to feel like I was missing out. We always had a roof over our head, for the most part, whether it was a nice roof or not a nice roof. I never really doubted that wouldn't be the case, you know. And maybe we didn't have nice clothes. I remember I had pants with like bleach stains and holes, and I had a choir concert once, and we had to wear freaking black pants. It just so happens to be the only pants I had were ugly. So I would like color them in with like a Sharpie, and I would color my leg in with a Sharpie, and I made it work. Like, we just made it work. Like, I had friends that had Barbies, like name brand actual Barbies, you know, and they had all the fancy clothes. You know, my cousins had Barbies. My cousins had so much toys and bikes and all this stuff. And my mom didn't let us feel like I was missing out. She was like, let's make some clothes. Like, look at her. Like, she doesn't even get to be creative. She just buys the stuff. We can make it. And we had floss, so we would use floss as a sewing, like, to sew stuff, and we would make our own Barbie clothes. And it was just something that was so much fun. Like, I think my parents did such an amazing job making sure that I never felt disadvantaged. I always felt privileged. I always felt like I am so lucky that they brought me to a country where I get a free education. You know, obviously they pay taxes, but like, not compared to Mexico where you have to pay for school and can't go if you can't pay, which was my mom's experience. And I always had food, and she would tell me all these stories about how, like, they had to go out to the fields to find food, sometimes to get fruit, you know. And I had clean floors, and it was important to keep my floors clean because I had them. And like, people in Mexico work their whole life to get tiles for their house, and they have to build their own houses. You can't just rent a nice place. And like, I felt very blessed in those senses, and I think that's been a really big, I think, a positive thing of my life. My parents also put a lot of importance on education and excellence. So like I said, we had to have good grades. I only got bad grades in, I think it's a total of like 3 classes, where like I got a C. And it was acting, because I was fucking terrified. Like, I couldn't do it. And the teacher didn't help me like with getting past that anxiety. I just like said I can't do it, and she let me not do it. And I remember she just gave me a C. That was a big deal. In science class, I remember I got really mad at the teacher because she made us do these dumb, like, busybody homeworks that didn't teach us anything. And I remember being like, I don't want to do it. So I remember getting in my heels. I'm like, I'm not doing it because I want to learn. And then PE, because I slept during that class. But other than that, like, it was really much instilled in us that we had to care. We had to do our work, and I had to care about what I was doing, and I had to do my work for excellence sake. My dad would talk about how, like, you don't work for the sake of money, you work to do a good job. You know that whole concept of like, you do everything that you do it because God's looking at you, not because because it's for your own benefit, or no. You worked for the sake of working. You did well for the sake of doing well, and you went to school because it's a freaking opportunity that not most people have. And I think those are amazing things. I see the benefit of having my dad. I mean, he yelled at me if I didn't cut a tomato correctly, right? But I learned how to cut a freaking tomato correctly. I get yelled at if I didn't clean correctly, but I know how to clean correctly. I know how to do things correctly. I know how to do the things that I have to do to survive, because they made very well sure that I did. Maybe the way they went about it, which yelling or hitting, or, you know, all of that was hard. And now that I'm an adult and I think about having kids, I think about the fact that, like, if my reaction first when I see somebody do something that makes me upset, that I have to work on that, and I have to make sure that when I have kids, I don't react the way they reacted, and that I don't use words to hurt people, and that I don't expect things from people who can't be, like, you can't demand things from kids that isn't within their scope of knowledge. And, you know, so I learned a lot about how you are supposed to go about, but the actual things that happen, the protection and the security and the excellence and all those things, I think were positive values. Obviously, it's just that things didn't come about the way that they should. I also got to learn, you know, like, my parents value certain things that I don't value, or my traditions of, like, my culture value certain things that I don't value. Like, I remember my dad saying once that, you know, when my mom came to the US, she started getting all these liberal ideas in her head. And that's the way he saw the fact that she didn't want to get hit by a man. You know, he saw it as this, like, liberal idea, like this, like, new age American individualistic, you know, that kind of thing. He didn't value it, right? Because that's just not what they valued growing up, where he's from, what he learned. Obviously, in my head, I'm like, no, I want, like, hello, I'm in America, it's 2020, like, life's different. And so I learned to value different things. I value mental health and psychology and the learning of those things. I value healthy relationships, not manipulation and violence. I don't value violence. I don't think that that's worthy of a cause. Even when you're angry, I think that that's an immature way to go about life. And some people value that. People will get into fights even if they're freaking 50 years old, and they think that's, like, cool. It makes them loyal or whatever. And I don't value those things. And I value programs that help people, because I've been in that situation where we had to get help and we had to stay at a shelter, and when we had to get support for, like, all these other things that I had to get help with throughout my life, and being, like, public education and all these things that other places don't have. And I would not value those things as strongly as I do had I not had the experiences that I did. So I think overall, I've had a life that has taught me a lot of really awesome things. I think that it's just that, you know, the way that everything happened was the issue. And so then I come to being an adult. Let me go into that real quick. I met my now husband in high school, and we dated for 4 years before we got married. I moved out of my house when I was 19. I left my house when I was in high school because we had a really bad, I wrote about this in my testimony at bit.ly/rose testimony, I think. But there was just an incident where things got really heated, really bad, and I stood up for myself for the first time, and I had to leave my home. And I lived with a friend for a while, and I ended up coming back home eventually, and I set boundaries with my dad. And, you know, from there on, I always fought. No matter what, I fought for whatever was I want. I didn't let him yell at me anymore. But eventually I needed to get out. Like, once I left, I was working on my own. Once I graduated, I was able to move out with Tony, and then I said I wanted to get married. I don't want to live together and not be married. I eventually became a Christian. I went through several jobs, eventually left working and started my business, and getting to this place here. And there's a lot of little details within that, as far as, like, where we lived, or how I graduated, or like, DACA was a huge deal, and maybe I'll talk about that in immigration, maybe in a podcast about immigration. And then I could talk about, like, my faith related stuff, and how I went from, like, not being an atheist, maybe more like an agnostic, like, either way, I didn't believe in the Christian faith. I was very adamant against the Christian faith, to getting to a point where now I consider myself a Christian, and that is my priority, right? There's a lot about that I guess I could talk. And then my business, and how I went from, like, even having the idea of, like, doing YouTube videos, which is how it started. Like, my idea the first idea I had, straight out of high school, I signed up to do Avon. Throughout the years, that was the primary job that my mom was able to do, so I helped her with that, and that was something that I was able to kind of, so I had already had growing up the idea of, like, entrepreneurship. So to go from that and see my mom do that and all of that, you know, that's its own story. I can go into that later on. I have a little bit of that on my website, like a video I made several years back of why I started a business, and I think the ideas and what I'm actually doing have changed a lot throughout the years. But that can be in its own thing. And then I actually have a whole like sheet here next to me about my mental health journey, because that's another thing I have to keep track of when I end up seeing a new therapist. Is I kind of go over, okay, so I got first diagnosed with anxiety and PTSD from my childhood, and then depression, of course. Later on, after a lot of not things not working, I eventually got tested and was given the diagnosis of severe obsessive compulsive disorder, and then I was told I needed CBT and ERP therapy, and later on EMDR. I got told I had dissociation, cyclothymia, and then throughout the last few years, I've also been learning a lot more about like different neurodiversity and things like that, and that explain a lot of the weirdness that I had growing up. And that's its own category, and I could go into more details about those things later on. I think the thing that I want to note, also like finances, I think that's another thing, like going from being somebody who's obviously was very poor and grew up with people who didn't know much about finance, to getting to a place where we are now, where I feel a lot more secure about life and working and jobs and how I made those decisions. I think that's its own story to go through. But overall, I left home thinking that everything's gonna be fine. Like, I'm out. I made it. I didn't talk to my dad for a little bit. We actually got into a fight, and that's kind of why we didn't talk for a long time. And I think in a sense, I thought being away from him would help me heal. And I started learning about, like, I read a book on childhood or adult children of alcoholics, and that's where I finally got that, oh, what? Yeah, I do that. You know, a lot of those. And that got me in, like, maybe I should go to therapy, and that's how that kind of started. So here's the thing. I thought getting away from it meant it was done. I thought that I would walk out of the house and be free. And in a sense I was, but I wasn't. The ramifications, is that the right word? Like, if you wake up in the morning and you're yelled at, or like, for example, we used to wake up to go to school, and I think I had like 50 something absences in a year once, because sometimes my dad just wouldn't wake up, and so we didn't go to school. But I had to be awake and ready. Or the ramifications of being somebody who went to sleep at midnight every night and had to be up at 5 in the morning as a teenager when you have a growing brain. Of seeing violence or being threatened with violence often. And of, like, just not having a support system, not having consistency I have consistency for anything. We moved so much, and we didn't go to school at the same time. We didn't even be around the same family all the time, and we just erratic. That's all I could say about my life. Like, I don't think a lot of bad things happen. Like, my dad didn't hit me that many times. I mean, the time he busted my lip open was a big deal. Once he slapped me because my uncle said that I was supposed to be doing something, and those times were very angering, but I never thought of my dad as somebody, like, I was never afraid he'd hit me in the sense that he did that often. I was just always afraid of what might happen if I pissed him off enough. If I did the wrong thing enough. Like, getting yelled at because I accidentally drank out of the wrong cup once. Or, like, what if I broke that? Oh my god, what if I did? Like, I was constantly on edge. Constantly. And then there was this constant pressure to, like, pretend everything was okay, because you didn't want to put him in a bad mood. So I was having to, like, smile, and if things were going on, I could not, like, share that. I remember getting in trouble when my friend died, and I had to ask for permission to go see his family, and having to have my dad call during that, and be forced to come home and interrupt somebody else's grief, because I was so scared that I needed to get home. And not being able to share how I was feeling, and I thought all of that would no longer be an issue the moment I walked out. I was wrong. The moment I walked out, like, my life turned upside down. I remember I had to go to the dentist because I had never been to the dentist growing up. That wasn't an option. If you're an immigrant, you don't get to just go to the doctor unless it's an emergency. So I went to the doctor, and at this point, I was okay. I'm a 19-year-old kid who's already lost like 3 teeth, right? And I had to have a root canal, and I had to have all sorts of cleanings and all sorts of like procedures, and I had to spend all this money on it. And I remember them telling me how much everything was going to be and what I had to do, and I just like, Tony had gone with me that day, and I had never felt this way in front of a person before, because we walked out and we had to go get the bus because we didn't have a car, like, things like, it was just overwhelming. I remember I like freaked out, and that's what I called it back then because I didn't know what it was, but I had a panic attack. That's what I know it is now. And I had never had that in front of another person. I had never experienced that. That was like the first year when we moved in together, and suddenly it started happening all the time. Like, sometimes I had 3 panic attacks in one day. I was going to school full time, working full time. I had started doing the Avon thing. I then eventually had to start doing therapy. So we were doing a lot. We had our own first place, and we got puppies. We just went, like, we tried way too much. I was newly married, so the expectations of what like I was supposed to do, and suddenly was like, there was a lot of issues with, like, I guess my relationship's a whole other thing I can go into in a different podcast, but like, again, remember, I was going to be Miss Independence, and suddenly I was cooking and cleaning and like paying bills, and it was like I was at a job. First I started out at a job where everyone was really shitty, to the point that I'm only friends with one person. It's actually where I found one of my best friends, but in that time, all the people we worked with, a lot of them, I'm pretty sure I could say that they were alcoholics. Like, there was an expectation for you had to be able to do certain things at work. Like, people, like, they were mean. And I remember being like, I come from a house where, like, I got yelled at all the time. Why is this such a big deal? Like, and I think it's because I expected that the world was going to be a little bit different once I got out. And I couldn't handle it. Like, I couldn't talk to these people. I couldn't, like, I tried to joke and I tried to be normal like I used to. Because in high school, I did a lot of, like, I was able to pretend long enough and put on a persona of a normal person. And I could no longer do that. And there were a lot of cultural things that have come up over the years. And I'd like to have a conversation about that as well. Because things that I didn't even know were real things. Like, I remember one time they were talking about skiing, and I was like, skiing? People ski? And they're like, yeah, you're from Colorado. What do you mean? And I was like, I thought that was just the thing rich people did. Like, I didn't know that people skied. Like, so much of that experience was of, like, suddenly I had to engage with people outside of my family unit, but I still didn't talk about what's happening at home, so I didn't have any way of explaining and understanding why I was so different from everyone. And I didn't have any of the tools, because I'd never been around people like that, to understand how to fake it. And so then I don't think anybody's intention was to hurt me or anything like that, and that's not how I see it. It's just that when you get called a bitch by your boss, like, you just, and you're like, what did I do? Like, I didn't understand. I remember, like, having panic attacks before going to work. And then I got a new job at a call center where I got yelled at and bitched at on the phone by random people, which wasn't because of me, and it was just, it wasn't like that's just the experience everybody else had there. But I remember it hit me really hard. Like, I remember, like, going home and crying because I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. Because I remember thinking, like, I'm hitting all my metrics, I'm doing all the right things, I'm doing all these things, like, I'm doing everything right, and still I feel like shit every single day. Like, I felt horrible every single day. And I would wake up sometimes and, like, my body hurt so bad, and I hadn't done anything to make my body hurt. Like, I didn't understand what was going on, and all I wanted to do was sleep, and I just wanted to die. Like, I hated life. At this point was also when, like, I was becoming a Christian, and so then, I didn't understand, like, okay, I'm a Christian now, so why don't I feel better? Like, I don't feel better no matter what I do. A lot of other things came up, like expectations, like, I was supposed to be this type of wife, because that's what a good Christian wife is. But I was also supposed to be, like, this independent woman somehow. And I was supposed to somehow juggle those two, and all the expectations were on me, right? At the same time, like, dealing with family, like, I lost all family support during that time, especially the early years. I wasn't connected to anybody. everybody lived somewhere else for the most part, and my dad, who was close, didn't live near me, or I didn't go visit him or anything like that. My brother was a teenager, he was doing his own thing, and I didn't really connect with him during that time. And then, because I was married, suddenly I also lost a lot of friends, like my high school friends, because I couldn't just stay up all night talking to some dude about his girlfriend, right? Like, I couldn't do that anymore. And I had all this, like, weighing those expectations of, like, I need to be a wife now. But, like, how do I stay friends with people? And then I couldn't share, because at this point, again, nobody knew about my upbringing. They knew my dad was strict, but they didn't know all the details. I only had a couple friends who knew some of the details. So it's not like I could talk about, like, hey, this is why I'm struggling with this. So at the same time, I knew I couldn't go out and drink and smoke and do all the things they did in the sense that they did, because I was also kind of dealing with the idea that, like, what if I become an alcoholic like my dad? I can't do that. Like, oh, but I'm also a Christian. I'm not supposed to drink and party. And I would, like, not know what to do. And so I had a good good several years there where, like, I lost my confidence, I guess, in a way. I think I felt a lot of confidence in high school, and, like, remember, I did good in high school, okay? I was the Crest Scholar, or whatever that means. I had joined clubs, and I had done, like, I was able to do some really good things leading up to the end of high school, and I was going to college. I was the first one in my family to go to college, and I was going to have a good career, and I was going to do all these things, and then it was like barrier after barrier, like, oh, you can't just go to any college because you don't have papers, you can't apply for college. Oh, now you can apply for college, but it costs $90,000 and you can't get loans. Oh, you want to go to this degree, but you can't get a license because you're an immigrant. Oh, you want to be able to go to work, you have to pay several $1,000s, and now every few years, several $100s in order to be able to apply to go to work. And then it was like barrier. And then at the same time, I was learning all these Christian things, right? So I was trying to learn the Christian things and being given a lot of messages. So I want to point out that the faith thing is a big deal for me, because a lot of the messages I was receiving were not biblical. So a lot of them were like submission, and you shouldn't be working, you shouldn't have a career, and your job is to be a wife, and your job is to do this. Like, I was confused again. At the same time, I wasn't, like, making new friends, because I'm a little weird, but I didn't know why I was weird. So, as far as it goes, like, I didn't get along with people at work. Like, not that I had active issues with them, I just didn't know how to joke with them. I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to be a normal person, and, like, my attempts at being friendly were not, now I understand a lot more, and I've learned a lot more about myself and how to, like, communicate differences and how to set boundaries, expectations, like all this smart stuff that I teach about on all my social media, right, and on my website. But I didn't know any of that back then, which is why it's such a big deal to me. Coaching is such a big deal to me, and all of this stuff is a big deal to me, because it made a huge difference in my life. Because now I have friends, and now I have relationships, and now I have a good family and a good support system and a good house, and I have a good schedule and a good routine, and I don't have panic attacks daily, and I don't fear the world daily, and I can drive and I can do things like that. For a very long time, I struggled with a lot of things, and I'm not on medication now. That's a bad thing. It's just that for a long time I struggled, and the thing is that I didn't understand why I was struggling. I didn't know how to fix anything. The ramifications, so, like, the results of having gone through that constant, like, daily erratic chaos, like, meant that even when I was fully in control of my life, it was exactly the same. Like, I had no control. I had not learned how to have control over anything. And so I think that's why it's so important to me to talk about things, to talk about what I experienced, because I know there's people out there experiencing the same things. I talk to them all the time, and to be able to just be like, yeah, like, I get that. Like, I've been through something similar to that. I know what you're experiencing, at least in some sense. And look, there's a brighter day. There's a rainbow at the end of the storm. Like, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like, you can get out of that. It makes a huge difference for people. And some of my bigger fears about sharing a lot of this stuff, and like I said, there's a lot I didn't share because I don't want to I don't want to out myself too much. Or I don't want to, share private details about other people's lives. But I fear that people will look at a story like mine and be like, oh my God, you're just complaining over nothing. Or that they'll think like, you need to get over it. Or, things like that, because that's what I see people respond to other people. And I get that, like, one, if you've experienced something similar or worse, because there are people who've experienced way worse, who tell themselves daily, I got through this. I got over this. You should be able to get over this. But they don't realize sometimes the effect that denial is having on their life. And there are people who had just never experienced anything like that, and they're like, oh my God, like, that's not even true, or it's fake, or maybe some people are thinking like, they don't understand why I may make certain decisions, or people who maybe don't know, like, because I'm not sharing all of the details and they don't know the extent of certain things, they hear things like abuse from your parents and they're thinking, oh my God, did your dad spank you? Like, like they just have a different understanding of why things are the way they are. And they may not realize that when they say those things to people who have not gone through any of the work I've gone through to kind of get myself to a stable place, those words cut you deep. And they can hurt you, and they can cause people to make decisions. I know that a huge part of why I feel stable today is because I had a lot more opportunities than other people had in order to get the support that they needed in order to get to a place where they're healthy, right? So, for example, I took a psych course in high school. Had I not taken that course, I wouldn't have even thought of any interest in mental health and that kind of world. So I wouldn't have gone to school for that. I wanted to go to school for art. And so maybe I wouldn't have been hit by oh my God, I think I do those things. Maybe I need help. Maybe I should read this book. And maybe I wouldn't have learned about, hey, what my dad's experiencing is alcoholism. Oh, what he's doing is considered mental emotional abuse. Hey, maybe I should get support. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten that support, and I would be thinking right now that violence is the way to do things. And that if you're angry, it means you can do whatever you want because you're angry. Or maybe I would be having kids right now because I wouldn't have delayed having kids, thinking that I could handle it because everybody else handles it, right? Like my mom told me once that she was just very glad that I didn't get traumatized by everything we went through. And her thinking back then, like, oh yeah, I'm not traumatized. But I can't imagine having kids today and treating them the way that I was treated because I just think that's the way things are done, right? Or the fact that I had Tony and that he brought God into my life, right? And those kind of things made a huge difference in my decision to continue knowing more and learning more and wanting to keep myself alive long enough to get to a better place because I wanted to die. And I had the means to do it, but the fact that I went through certain experiences that showed me that there's more hope in the world and that there's people out there that can get through these things and have a healthy life made me feel that I could keep searching. And by keeping searching, I went through school for psychology, and then I went through the entirety of like coaching and learning about coaching and learning about CBT and learning about self-help, and it gave me an outlet for my experience to make a difference in the lives of other people. And if I didn't have that, I think of like how I would have a very different life than I have now. Just in general, I know I would. Not that I have an amazing life or perfect life or anything like that. It's just I just have a more stable life than I did before, and I think that's the goal, to just at least make it a little bit better every day. And that's my hope by sharing this, that at least somebody will listen and be like, even if it's just one part of the story that says, oh, I went through something like that. I wonder what that means. And maybe it pushes you to look at something else, and one more article, one more Google, one more book, one more YouTube video, whatever it is that gets you to that next little place where you're a little bit better every single day. I know this is an incredibly long video. If you listen to this whole thing, thank you so much, and please don't judge me. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound whiny or complainy. I just wanted to share this because I think it matters to share your experience, regardless of whether it's a bad experience or a good experience, and just part of the human experience, right? So I think that's all I'm going to share for today. Maybe later on I'll make a list of all the things I said I would share in other podcasts, and I'll do podcasts about those, because I think maybe that can be helpful. But I think that's all for today. I think I shared all the little notes that I had. Don't you just love the sound of rustling paper? Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and finish this off here, because I think that my life's continuing, and that's a good thing. And I think that that's a good thing. You know, that this podcast doesn't end here. This story doesn't end here. I have a story that's continuing and can help other people's stories continue. And yeah, I'm smiling, if you can't tell. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. If you're going through any difficulties during this COVID-19 pandemic experience, that's kind of interesting. Now I get to like make that part of my story, even though it's not, you know, it hasn't affected me in as big a way as it could affect other people. I just want to say that I really hope that you share your story at some point. I hope that your story continues, and I hope that at least during this difficult time, this is just a chapter. And I hope you had time to listen to this because of the pandemic and because you're stuck home. But thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Be blessed. Please reach out if you need any kind of support, and I'm going to add a bunch of support resources down in the commentary below this. Thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.